Welcome to Beyond HR, the podcast for people first leaders who know that HR is about more than checklists and compliance. I'm Paige, your co-host, and we will explore the real challenges shaping today's workplaces. From burnout and belonging to strategy and storytelling, we're bringing you honest conversations, practical insights, and a fresh take on what it means to lead with heart in the world of work. Before we dive into our episode, a quick shout out to Manpower for generously providing the space where we record Beyond HR. And here's a quick word from our launch sponsor.
If you're feeling stretched thin, juggling big changes, emotional labor, and communication breakdowns, you're not alone. Hi everyone, I'm Dan Kaplan, founder of Bring Disc to Life, an online community for aspiring leaders and HR professionals. We give you the strategies, tools, and encouragement to communicate in ways that increase your influence while lowering your stress. Using DISC, the 5 behaviors, and mindfulness, you'll learn to stay grounded, read minds, and frame your message to influence others. We have live workshops every month, group coaching to unpack tough situations, and tons of easy-to-use scripts, strategies, and resources that you can apply right away without adding more to your plate. So come refuel with a community that gets you and wants to help you speak your truth in a way that's heard. Join us at confidentcommunicator.com and click on community. That's confidentcommunicator.com. Lead yourself and others will follow.
I had interned for a company when I was in college. The company was called SRA International, and they were a defense contractor primarily. And I worked for them over the summer in their procurement office. And then when I got into my senior year, they invited me to apply for a full-time position. My undergraduate degree is actually in public relations and communications, so not HR. At the time, HR was not something that I really even knew about as a career path. And there weren't structured classes in that area where I went to school. So I started the position. I was offered the position and then accepted it and started full time with this company. And I was hired as an analyst. So I was actually working on a project related to TRICARE, which is the military's healthcare system. And I did that for several weeks. And my project manager came to me and said, unfortunately, our project has lost funding. And at the time, I was terrified that I was losing my first big girl job. But my project manager then said, you have some time to find another opportunity internally. Apparently, this is a funding issue that happens fairly frequently in the government contracting space. And so one of the positions that I applied for internally was as a junior recruiter. And I got that position and started working as a junior recruiter, supporting contracts at NIH and the FDA. And then I had an opportunity from there to move into college recruiting, where I managed the company's college recruiting program. From there, went into employee communications and then training and development. And that was all over the course of about a 6-year period. At that time, I had an opportunity to take a job with my family's company and move into HR management. And I did that for just around 11 years. And about 9.5 years ago, I started HR Answer Box.
Wow. Gosh, what a journey. And yeah, you're right. I think a lot of us fall into this profession very accidentally because we don't even know what to anticipate. I remember going through college and the advisors actually kind of going through, what do you want to do in life? Like, I don't know. I mean, I'm a college student, right? That's what I want to do in life right now. So when they were talking to me about, different paths, I originally started in early childhood education. I loved the education piece, and something kind of pulled me back from that. It was unfortunate, but one of the exams that you actually have to take, I failed by 2 points. And I said, you know what? As a college student, you're like, ugh, fine, I'm not meant to do that. And so I went for my bachelor's degree. So that was only my associate's degree. So I went for my bachelor's degree and I said, you know what? I love the education side. What are my options? And they said, well, you could just do business administration and then you could minor in something. And I'm like, okay, what's my options? And so they went through my options and HR came up and I'm like, HR? I never thought that I could be great in HR, right? And I said, you know what? Let's do it. It's a minor. I'll see if I like it. It's not going to hurt anything. And
Hmm.
then I got in, got my, big girl job in HR as a HR department of one specifically. And I jumped in head over heels, and I don't think I've looked back. And then I decided to get a master's specific to HR. Crazy.
You're
So
not
it's
wired.
always
You're
a
not
Some
wired
journey.
normal though. That's why.
and some might argue that HR on its worst days is a lot like early childhood education.
Oh,
Oh, I think
very
it's easier to deal with
true.
kids. Yeah.
Sometimes, because you can actually rationalize with kids at least sometimes. And it's hard with adults just because of how we are as adults, right?
Yeah.
It's just we're adults, and that's hard.
And I think
What about you, Well? How did you jump in?
well, I was gonna say before that, but I think from my perspective too, I feel like with children, at least there's an expectation that they're still learning, and there's gonna be things
Oh,
that they know, but that they don't know. Whereas adults, it's sometimes like you should know by now. You're 40. Come on, hang with me. No, actually, I was another one that fell into HR by accident. I actually my very first out of high school job was working for Target Distribution Center actually as a shipping offloading person. And then, obviously with the understanding that that's a very physical job, I was there for a few months. I ended up getting in a personal out of the work accident on a four-wheeler that made it hard to do that job. So then it kind of forced me to look for work. And then I happened to come across a staffing company that was hiring for a bilingual recruiter. Or, well, at first it was a bilingual sourcing specialist. So pretty much just somebody on the phone screening candidates. Started working with them. And then shortly after I was like, hey, I can make commission being a recruiter more so than a sourcer. So let me go ahead and put that bug in my boss's ear. Went through a lot of different training processes and struggles that come with that industry, and ended up getting promoted to recruiter. And then shortly after that, I was like, I don't think I want to recruit for the rest of my life. It takes a very
I
special
wouldn't
kind of
either.
person to do that. So then my first official whole HR job was HR coordinator for a company based out of Chambersburg, Pennsylvania. And then I been in HR since. I always say that I tried to run away from it for about a year. I was an operations supervisor for about a year and a half for the Home Depot, and then yeah, HR just kind of reels
Not
you
the
back in.
same.
Yeah, but I
Yeah.
enjoyed it. Don't get me wrong. I did actually truly enjoy the aspect of it because I got to deal with. I'm a very analytical person, so I got to deal with a lot of spreadsheets and fluctuations of what kind of shipment we had to bring in to make sure that we were loading our trucks properly. So that was fun. But HR just kind of reels you back in. I feel like once you have that ability to deal with people, and I think for me, just being patient, even though I'm still learning that I can always be more patient, just being patient and wanting to know more about people or understand people, kind of just it's the one thing that people go, oh, all right, come on, let's do this. So yeah,
Yeah.
that's
Gosh, it's always a story. I can't wait to hear a lot of folks' stories throughout the time because I think everybody has a fun story to go along with HR, like it or not.
yeah,
Uh,
for sure.
so tell me the story a little bit about HR Answer Box and its mission.
Yeah, so our mission from the very beginning is to build better workplaces, and I feel very passionate about that. We really identified a gap in the market, and Paige, you had talked about being an HR department of one, and that was my experience as well prior to
Mhm.
launching HR Answer Box. And so I knew that there were a lot of companies that didn't have the luxury of having a full-time HR department. In some cases, they don't have anyone who is totally assigned to HR. It might be the controller or accountant or an office manager or someone who is doing HR as an other duty as assigned, but
Yeah.
they're not always totally skilled in HR or totally confident in handling HR. And so that was the gap that we identified. We also work with companies who are a little bit larger that might have an HR department of one, but that person can't do everything. The bandwidth of one person handling HR for an entire organization is a lot,
Yeah.
right? And so,
Yes.
because we've been there, we uniquely understand what those challenges look like. And so, our goal was to make our clients' lives easier, keep them in compliance, help them navigate the things that they're not regularly comfortable with handling, and just figure out how we can add value. And so, we launched HR Answer Box about 9.5 years ago. And I remember saying to my husband, I was still working full time for my dad's company, and he knew what was going on. We had decided as a family that we wanted to sell the company. And so I knew at some point the company was going to be acquired, and that was a good thing. My dad had worked really, really hard, and I wanted to see him kind of celebrate that success and enjoy the fruits of those labors. And I knew I needed to do something else beyond that. And so I decided that I was going to launch a company. And I remember having a conversation with my husband, and I said to him, I'm going to take $5,000 out of our savings account, and I'm going to give this a shot for 6 months. And the words that I used were, if it doesn't work out, I'll go get a real job. Now, for anyone that has ever launched a business,
Yeah.
you know that it is
A
very
very
difficult, totally a labor of love, and absolutely 100% a real
good job.
job.
Yeah.
But in
Yes.
my thinking and talking this through, that was kind of where I was with my mindset. And good news, I was really fortunate to have pretty immediate success and pay that money back to our personal savings account pretty quickly, and had a lot of really cool things that happened. So the family's company did not get acquired as quickly as I thought it would, so they actually became my first client.
Oh,
So we
that's
were
cool.
able to outsource some of the
Oh,
work that I'd been doing. I was actually managing HR and marketing, so we outsourced the marketing piece. We had some internal folks take a couple of pieces as well, and then I held on to the HR functions primarily. And that was really good because you want to have that little bit of runway when you start your own enterprise. So from there, I just put the word out. And, thankfully, I had a really good network through my local SHRM chapters across the state. And I just kind of said to people in person, via email, via social media, hey, I'm doing this thing. If you have any work that you've been putting on the back burner and you think I can help, let me know. And then it happened. People
mm,
started reaching out to me because I had built that network over
mhm.
more than a decade, and people knew that I could help them, and they knew that I was someone who really cares about the quality of my work. And people started hiring me, and then people started hiring me again, and then they were telling people about me. And so I was really, really lucky in those first couple years, and the business has continued to grow. And then in January of 2024, I actually acquired another business. And so I acquired a referral service, and now we have about 260, 270 HR and OD consultants, trainers,
Wow.
coaches, and speakers that we act as a broker for to match employers with their skill sets.
Oh, wow. That's
Oh,
awesome.
wow.
You're an HR.
That's
You're an HR
amazing.
matchmaker.
I
Yeah.
am.
I just think of Mulan when I
That's a
said
lot of
that.
fun. Yes. I love that though. That's such a great story. And I knew you had acquired that company back in January, and I was like, go, Amanda.
Well, thanks. It's been
It's
really
awesome
fun.
to see it. Yeah. Yeah. But you're right. When you're reaching out to folks, it's crazy how welcoming that they actually are. And I know, like us specifically, we reach out to a lot of folks and just to talk, and they're like, sure, I'll talk.
Hmm.
Yes. So it's crazy what can actually happen when you just ask. And a lot of people are afraid to ask. So good for you.
Yep.
Yeah, definitely.
Thank you.
Now, seeing both sides of that coin now, being an actual HR person and now you being a consultant to HR people, how does that compare?
So I really love being a consultant, and here's why. Every day is different.
Hmm.
And now, instead of working in just one industry, I get to work with a ton of different industries and sectors. We have clients that are for profit, we have clients that are nonprofits and associations, and then a small part of our business serves municipal government. So having that variety really keeps it interesting. And it's funny, I feel like I have a lot of conversations where clients will come to me and say, I bet you've never heard this, or you've probably never dealt with this. And in the back of my mind, I'm thinking, oh, yeah, only 3 times this week. Even though they represent very different industries and sectors, the HR problems are the HR problems,
Right.
right? And so there are a lot of commonalities, even if people don't initially realize that. And we're here to support those challenges and help them navigate the things that they're unsure about.
When it comes to that essence of losing your passion for what you do, or kind of losing focus and things like that, is it similar in regards to like being an HR department of one, for example, versus consultant in HR department of one? Or what are the differences and similarities behind the two?
Yeah, that's a good question. So, this is actually something that I have been struggling with, but also putting my struggle to good use. I am in the process of writing a book
Ooh,
about invisible
congratulations.
burnout. And it's the book that I needed. So it's a little bit self-serving in that way, but I think it's going to help a lot of people. And one thing that I observed about myself, particularly when I first launched my business, was that I have always had a tendency to be a workaholic. And when you work for yourself and you work primarily from a home office, the boundary isn't there. When you work in someone else's office, you get to go home at night. When you work in your own office that is adjacent to your living space, there's not a clear separation. And so I found myself responding to emails at all hours of the night, working on weekends, working in the evenings. It wasn't healthy. And so I needed to make some changes so that I didn't have full burnout happening to me. And so I would consider myself a work in progress. I definitely don't have it all figured out, but I am doing better with boundaries, particularly around work times and responding to emails and kind of managing client demands in a more realistic and appropriate fashion. But I've been doing this over 9 years now, and it's taken that long to get to this place.
Yeah. I think that's a lot of the struggle that we're seeing right now, specifically with HR, and I'm sure that other professions also have the same exact problem. But we're of course in the day to day, in the thick of it, and so we see what we're going through every single day. But we struggle, I think, because we don't have an outlet. You just talked about the book that you wrote and how that is kind of self-serving, but also going to help others too. And, I think that Will could say that he's still kind of going through it. And I feel like I'm also a work in progress too, but setting boundaries is super, super important. But to kind of get the gist of what I'm saying, so I'm wondering what would you recommend to folks who are struggling to put those boundaries in place?
Yeah, start small. You can't drink the ocean in one sip. So don't try to totally revamp your life overnight because you're probably not going to be successful if you upend everything. Instead, start small, start incrementally. What is one change that you can make today or this week that will help you with boundary setting or time management or reducing your stress just on, a micro level? All of us have stressors in our lives. We're not going to totally get rid of that. And to think that we are is quite frankly unrealistic. But there are some things that we can do to reduce our stress that comes from the work that we're doing. The HR profession has a lot of emotional load built into it. We're the people that have to have the difficult conversations. We're the people that have to deal with the really dicey employee relations scenarios. We're the people that have to manage and execute the layoffs and the terminations. it's a lot, right? And so if we don't take care of ourselves, we're not going to be good to anyone else in our organizations. So it's important to figure out how do we get that balance for ourselves and what are those little changes and be really strategic about it. Write things down when they work. And if it doesn't work the first time, keep trying. I'm not perfect by any stretch of the imagination, but I've made some little changes. One example that comes to mind is I made up this thing called the 9 p.m. rule. And I
Hmm.
talk about it when I teach time management to my clients, employees. And the 9 p.m. rule is simply that I put my phone on the charger around 9 p.m. Now, don't always do that on the weekends because, the weekend schedule is a little bit different.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
during the week, that is like a hard line where I don't look at email anymore. I don't look at social media. I'm not responding to text messages. I put my phone on the charger and I don't look at it until I wake up the next day. And for me, that's been a strategy, as simple and as silly as it may sound, that helps me to decompress before I go to bed. So I normally go to bed around 10 o'clock. And so by having that hour without screen time, it helps me to sleep better. And
Hmm.
that's just one small strategy. Doesn't cost anything, takes two
Yeah.
seconds, pretty easy to implement as long as you're consistent with it and you commit to that habit. It works. And so that's what I mean by not trying to take on too much at once. If you make those little shifts over time, they really add up and they do make a difference to your overall health and well-being.
Just a quick pause to thank a key supporter making our very first in-person event happen. Huge thanks to the People Readiness Company, our title sponsor for Wake Up HR, Conversations That Fill You Back Up, coming up on August 6th. Now, let's get back to the conversation.
Now,
Great.
when folks come to you asking for your services in regards to like people situations, um,
Mhm.
what kind of tools have you come up with to be able to protect your energy while you're holding space for other people?
Yeah, that's a really important factor because you can't do 8 hours, 5 days a week of dealing with really complicated employee relations situations. And so, for example, some of the work that we do is workplace investigations. So those are the really most complicated, most challenging employee relations situations that we navigate for clients. And on weeks where I'm doing interviews related to a workplace investigation, I really try to block my time so that that is my main focus. I also try to structure in a little bit of a break in between interviews just so I can get up and stretch and use the restroom, get a drink of water, all of those things that are necessary to your own livelihood versus scheduling, back to back to back to back. Also, too, something that I read that came out of the pandemic was it's not healthy for us to be on video like Zoom 8 hours a day because
Hmm.
your
Hmm.
brain functions differently on phone calls than it does on video meetings. And so, not so much with workplace investigations because those are done better either in person or via Zoom because you want to get the nonverbals and the body language. But on calls that are related to other things, sometimes I try to have an old-fashioned phone call. And so many times people will say to me, "Oh, it's so nice that this isn't a Zoom," or "Oh, I was looking for the link and then I realized we were just doing a phone call." And I'm
Yeah.
like, I always say, if you want to switch to Zoom, we can. And people 9 times out of 10 say, "Oh no, I actually prefer this is nice." So, just doing things like that can really change it up as well.
Is there anything that
Yeah.
you do for yourself to recharge or uncharge at the end of the day?
Yeah,
What kind of
absolutely.
practices do you have in place?
Yeah, so I have lots of hobbies that are not HR related. I actually have written a couple children's books,
Oh, okay.
and my husband and I are working on a side business to launch a line of ready to drink bourbon-based cocktails.
Okay.
So
Okay.
that has nothing to do with HR, other than HR people do enjoy a good happy
I
hour.
was gonna
So
say, yeah.
there's a correlation there. I love to travel. My husband is a Baltimore County police officer, and he just got a service dog for his work.
Oh,
Service dog lives with us, so
Oh,
he's been
nice.
home
oh,
for just less than a week. It'll be a week tomorrow, and so
oh,
we are loving on him and spending time with him. So just having interests outside of work really helped me.
yeah. Yeah, and it's funny you say that about the dog and how you're loving on him. Have you felt like if you have kind of a tough day, and it might have not happened in this week or not, but if you've had a tough day this past week and you just love on the dog, how does that make you feel?
Yeah, it's great. So he's actually trained as a facility dog, which
Oh.
is partially emotional support to first
Hmm.
responders. So we kind of joke in our house that he's my emotional support dog when he's off the clock.
I love that. I love
And
that.
he's a little love. He loves to cuddle. And so we have cuddle time
Oh.
every evening. But yeah, it's definitely a stress releaser for sure.
Yeah, yeah. I have dogs myself, and boy, when I get off like a difficult phone call and I'm actually working remotely, I have a hybrid schedule. So when I am remote, I can look to my dogs and they just look at me and they can just tell and they just cuddle up to you. It's crazy how they can really understand what you're going through, yet they don't say anything.
Yep.
So maybe that's the secret.
Just feel and don't say. Yeah.
Right, right, right. Ooh, I don't know about that. When it comes to, so you have gone through the situation of potentially almost burning out. What kind of triggered you to say, oh, I am actually starting to burn out. I need to do something about that. Was it like a certain thing that happened? Was it several things?
There wasn't one dramatic moment. So the book is about invisible burnout, which is a little bit different than traditional burnout. So traditional burnout is where people find themselves in the midst of a panic attack. Sometimes they go to the emergency room because they think they're having a heart attack. It's very or tends to be very dramatic. There's this break where they go into this out of body experience is how it's been described to me by some people who have experienced severe burnout like that. For me, it wasn't that. It wasn't anything dramatic, but I started to lose joy in the work that I was doing. And part of me tried to rationalize it and say, well, you've done this for 25 years. You may not continue to always have that same spark that you did when you were in your 20s. And then I thought about it more and was like, this is my career though, and I need to do this for many more years. So I got to figure it out. And so I started just as kind of a self-help methodology reading about burnout, reading about strategies, and just became very fascinated in the topic. And so the premise of my book is yes, it's partially self help, but it's a little bit different than some other books on burnout because we have a lot of exercises and tools. It's more of a practical workbook kind of style book that I hope will be helpful to people instead of just reading about this is what burnout is, this is what it isn't, so
Yeah.
on and so
Hmm.
forth. I really want to make it more impactful than that. So, still in the editing process, but have about 150 pages of it written. So
Oh,
we're
very
getting
cool.
there.
Very nice.
Awesome. We're excited to read it once it comes out.
Yeah, yeah.
Thank you.
We'll have to bring you back and talk
Yeah.
about it at that point. Yeah.
Yeah,
Once you get
that'd
it,
be
once you
great.
Right.
get it
Thank
published,
you.
yeah,
Yeah.
definitely.
Yeah. So I'm sure that you have had to make a lot of very tough HR calls in the past 25 years. How do you make those really tough calls without actually losing your heart in the process?
Yeah, so I think my approach has always been to consider the perspective of all parties and to be as neutral in that as possible. We all have some sort of implicit bias baked into us, but trying to set that aside as much as possible and really evaluate what's in the best interest for both the organization and the employees that are involved in that situation. And that can be tough. That can be a very delicate balancing act. And usually there is at least one party who is not totally satisfied with the outcome. So trying to come up with at least an agreeable compromise that serves some of the requests of the parties involved, but perhaps not all of them, because, usually you wouldn't be in the situation if it had a really clear cut, there's a right and there's a wrong.
Yeah. I know me personally, I mean, that's kind of what I specialized in. Unfortunately, it was discipline and also termination. And in workplace investigations. I really specialized in that area. Plus, project management and also training, those types of things. And the one I will never forget, and it really made, my heart hurt. And I mean, and I've done a lot of these. And this poor individual, she just had her first child. So she had a newborn. She was having attendance problems, and it was a very rigid attendance policy at that time. And I remember having to call her and say, "Can you please come in? We really need to talk to you." And she said to me, she's like, "Well, I have I have my little one with me. It's a newborn. Can I bring the kid in with me?" And I'm like, "Nope, you may not. I would suggest that have somebody else watch the child. Like, I'm going through all of these things of, do you have a family member that could like sit with the child out in the car?" So here I am, I just had my first child at that point, and I was like, this is going to hurt. And so during that meeting, I literally had to terminate a person that just had a newborn, that had no husband, no boyfriend, nothing, had her mom as a support system because, and I know this because had that person in the car waiting for them. I cried afterwards.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, honestly, terminations are probably the toughest thing that we have to deal with as HR
Yeah.
professionals. Very early in my career, my really career-long mentor said to me, if you ever lose that kind of sick to your stomach feeling when you have to terminate someone, you need to find a new line of work. And it's true.
Mm-hmm.
Even when a termination is justified, and it should always be justified when we get to that
Sure.
point, because we've done everything in our power to get that employee's performance back to where it needs to be. It shouldn't be a
Hmm.
surprise at this point. And so sometimes we have to make that tough decision. But to this day, it's the thing that
Yeah.
I like least about my career. It has to do with the way that we treat people in those situations. It's obviously a very unfortunate, life-changing situation when someone is terminated and has
Hmm.
a lot of ripple effects on their livelihood. But if we can treat them with respect and dignity to the extent possible, that's what we need to do.
A lot of people don't realize that HR doesn't revel in terminating people. I feel
No.
like a lot of employees and a lot of folks in the workforce have this nuanced idea that we are just there waiting for something to
Like we're
happen for us.
loving
Yeah,
it.
and
Yeah. Twiddle my thumbs waiting for a termination.
yeah, and I can tell you that to your point, even the terminations that you're like are really bad reasons. Because to your point, everything is justified, but not necessarily. Some of them are like clear, like yeah, you punch somebody in the face, we can't keep you here, you know. But even
Right.
those, there's always an underlying something behind the scenes. Maybe that person had a really crappy day, or their spouse died, or something happened that the wrong trigger caused them to react in that anger purpose or angry way, that unfortunately I have to do my job in following the procedure of releasing them, but I can also sympathize and understand that that was just not their good day. I to your point, once you get to that place where it's just a easy out of your mind process, then maybe that's when you can start realizing, hey, maybe I am burnt out in this thing because I'm losing the humanity into what I'm doing, for sure.
Hmm.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
I would encourage all HR professionals to think about what are your core values? What is it that you want to bring to the table in your job, but also in your life? That first company that I talked about a little while ago, their core values included honesty and service. And
Mm.
so the company was founded by two military veterans. And so in everything that they did, they wanted to make sure that we were being honest, which is good because we were a contractor to the federal government. And so not being honest would have jail time
Yeah,
implications.
yeah, yeah.
So
Right.
very important, but also just a great way to run your business. And then the service piece was, giving back to the local communities and partnering with organizations and just having that kind of customer first, customer service focus in everything that we did. And I think I've carried that with me through my whole career to make sure that even on my bad days, that I treat people with respect and dignity and try to be responsive to what they're saying and really listen to what it is they're concerned about.
Hmm. Have you, Amanda, have you ever had a situation where you were in a termination and you were like, I really don't think that this is going to go well. And then at the end, they shake your hand or say thank you?
Yes. Yeah. So, over the years, I've had pretty much every emotional response that you can think of. And I have surprisingly had a few instances where people have thanked me for terminating them. And I have seen through their body language, there's this like lift where you can see the weight being lifted off their shoulders. They weren't able to make that decision for themselves, but when the
Hmm.
termination happened, they were relieved because they
Hmm.
were not happy. They were not enjoying the work, a whole host of other things, but they just couldn't get from where they were in that job to the next thing. And the
Hmm.
termination became a bit of a forcing function. And so that's been really interesting. I've had, people cry. I've had people be angry. There have been a
Hmm.
couple situations where I've been concerned about, workplace violence,
Hmm.
and taken
Yeah.
some steps to deal with that from a security standpoint. And
Yeah.
that's something that HR people don't want to talk about and don't want to think about, but it's become a reality
Yeah, unfortunately.
in many workplaces, and that's pretty scary.
Yeah, yeah. I remember some of the ones that I've ran into where I was also very, very concerned about workplace violence, and I had to put in steps to, have the police on site just to make sure that, they were ready to go just in case something happened. Had somebody else with me that was, much larger than me, being the female, being smaller, I'm 5'2" to give you all of the listeners' perspective, about 130 pounds, so I'm very tiny. So having somebody, much more large, so then they could actually kind of step in if they would ever need to. But, one of the things about terminations, it can be very definitely heavy on your heart. And like you said, Amanda, that was a really great comment you made of your mentor saying, if you stop having that sick feeling in your gut when you do termination, you should probably be looking elsewhere in a different profession. But um, when it comes to, listeners outside of being in HR, they don't realize all of these things happen behind the scenes and they just look at HR as the ones that are terminating you.
Yeah.
And in my perspective, we are not the ones terminating a person.
Yep.
This was, them, but also their supervisor is a big part of that too. So we are not the Grim Reapers, as I've
Yeah.
heard in the past, which is just wild to me. What a comment, right?
Yeah. Yeah, and to your point about, the supervisors play such a key role here, and I understand why a supervisor might not want to have the actual termination discussion, and in some
Sure.
cases might not be the best suited person to do that. But where it makes sense, I try to have that person in the room, for a couple reasons. One, as a teachable moment so that they can see how it's done properly, but also two, they need to be there to face the employee and say, this is why we've come to this decision, and they can run the timeline and the history of how we got here, because it shouldn't be a quick overnight decision unless it's something super egregious. But for
Sure.
a less serious performance problem or attendance issue, it's going to be a series of activities or lack thereof and some time between when the initial problem started and how we got to where we are today. So the supervisor is really integral in being the historian and sharing the facts around that.
Before we wrap up, we want to give a special thank you to two of our sponsors. First, we'd like to once again thank our launch sponsor, the Bring Disc to Life community at confidentcommunicator.com, for their generous support. We also want to thank one of our founding supporter sponsors, Chain Solutions. They have believed in the Beyond HR podcast since day one, and we are proud to have them alongside us. Chain Solutions has been a trusted name and background screening for just over 20 years. They are accredited, use secure mobile-first technology, and offer incredible responsive support with an average response time of just 18 minutes. If you're in need of a background screening partner who gets it right, fast and secure, Chain Solutions is one to know. And just for our listeners, they are waiving their usual $250 setup fee. Just mention you heard about them on the Beyond HR podcast. Thanks again to Chain Solutions for being a part of our journey.
So I guess one last question for you, I know we're kind of wrapping up here on time. So if the listeners could take away one powerful thing from today's conversation, maybe something that could rekindle their passion or give them fulfillment, what would you say that would be?
Yeah, I think it's really important that because we have so much that we're dealing with in HR and I talked about the emotional load of the work that we do. I think it's really important for HR professionals to take care of themselves and to look introspectively. Again, this is a stressful career and there are always going to be stressors, but it's how we effectively manage those stressors and taking time, making time to, even in a busy schedule, take a 5-minute walk or figure out how we can do something related to self-care. And I think sometimes people get self-care wrong. I love a massage and facial as much as the next person, but it doesn't have to be a spa day.
Right, right.
Self-care can be working out. It can be calling a friend. It can be going out to eat. It can be, doing a hobby or listening to music or, a whole host of other things that just bring some enjoyment to your life outside of the work that you're doing. And we have to be intentional about creating space for those activities, because if we're not, they don't happen. And, I've gone so far as to start to block time on my calendar so that I honor those commitments.
It's such great, great, great advice. I know even me personally, finding a hobby outside of HR has been very influential on my even self-care and also exercising, getting back into that and making time, like you said. And I think that's maybe what people, struggle with the most. They can't find that time. So then you're trying to figure out a way to fulfill yourself without having the time. And that's almost nearly impossible.
Before we wrap up, we definitely we want to make sure that we get an opportunity to have you talk a little more about you and about your business and how people can find you if they're interested in your services and whatnot. So we'll leave the floor open just for you.
Oh, thanks. So our websites are hranswerbox.com, and then the next one's kind of long, but go with me on this.
All right.
Trainers Consultants Referral Network.com, but you can also link to it through hranswerbox.com. So that
There
makes
we
it a
go.
little bit easier. And we're on social media. So we have business pages on LinkedIn and Facebook and personal pages as well. So would love to connect with any of your viewers. And if I can be of assistance to anyone in your communities, please feel free to reach out.
Awesome.
Thanks for tuning in to the Beyond HR podcast. We hope today's episode inspired you to reflect and grow in your own HR journey. Connect with us on LinkedIn, Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, and YouTube at Beyond HR Podcast. If you found value here, share it with your fellow HR professionals. Until next time, keep making an impact on yourself.